I'm not so sure whether... Is it too? It's okay. Yeah. Can you all hear me? I'm always a bit hesitant. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you've all been waiting and we're starting a little bit late, but I hope that we can make up for that with this absolutely fantastic panel that we have here tonight for the book launch of Ryan Brown's A Native of Nowhere, which is, as we all know, a biography of one of the most, I would say, interesting and well-known as well journalists of that generation, Nat Nakasa. And I'm very pleased to see that we have some students with us tonight as well as a lot of prominent guests that I also knew Nat very well and knew him personally. I just want to do a quick introduction to the panel, and then I'm going to hand over to our author and then to our panelists as well to say a few words about that. And then I'm hoping that we can go straight into question time so that we all get to ask our questions about Nat and about the book to Ryan and to our panelists who both have personal relationships and have personal relationships to Nat. So we have, of course, Ryan Brown, our author, with us here tonight. And we also have, lucky to have Mr. Peter Mangubana with us, who knew Nat personally. And Mr. Harry Machel Shame that the mic isn't run up properly. And my mic went dead as well. I don't know do I need the mic?
Mine seems to be working. As you want mine.
I am very, very pleased, and I'm very, very grateful, and I know that Ryan is grateful as well, that actually we got these two gentlemen with us tonight who graciously came to the launch and agreed at last minute, right now, to be on the panel with us. So I think that's amazing. Thank you very, very much. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ryan to actually talk to us about the book and say a few words before we go to the other panelists and then get a chance to ask our questions.
Thank you so much, and I just want to say a couple quick words of thanks before I start. I want to thank UJ very, very much for hosting this and organizing this, and the great folks at Chicana for all of their help in putting the book together and publishing it. It's been a really fantastic experience for me, so thank you all for your help, and thank you all for coming. Anyone who's worked on a big project like this knows that doing historical research can be very lonely and very isolating. And I was very lucky when I was here working on this project to have the support and company of a lot of people who knew Nat, his friends and family, which made the experience less solitary, but even still, it was a very isolated writing and reading and researching process, so it's really nice to have the chance to share it with people. So I thought tonight, since I just have a few minutes, rather than kind of run you through all of the particulars of Nat's life, which I wouldn't have time to do anyway, I thought instead I might just speak a bit to his legacy, and in particular to the ways in which his legacy has been used in contemporary South Africa, and what I think that says more broadly about the way that history is used and understood in this country. So most people who know the name Nat Nakasa know basically this. They know that he died very young, very far from home. He was in exile in the United States. He had just completed a journalism fellowship at Harvard University and had been told by the South African government that he could never return to South Africa, and by the American government that he could not stay in America. And so he had reached this quite lonely and desperate point in his life when at the age of 28, he was found having jumped or fallen, I think likely a suicide, but it's not known for sure, from a friend's apartment building in New York City. So this very quickly transformed him into this very potent symbol for the kind of great destruction that apartheid had wrought on Black writers and intellectuals and artists in South Africa. And I think that's very much the way Nat has been understood and known to most people who know him since. And I think this is the vision of Nat Nakasa that Jacob Zuma had in mind a few years back when he delivered the keynote address for the Nat Nakasa Award for Media Integrity, which is this nice award that's given out every year by the South African National Editors Forum. And it honors a courageous journalist, a journalist who writes the truth no matter the political trends of the day. So Zuma was asked to speak to Nat's legacy at this event. And he spoke, first he spoke of the country's journalists, saying that they were a vital partner in strengthening South Africa's democracy. And then he spoke of Nat himself. He called Nat a courageous patriot and said that he was celebrating the struggle of Nat Nakasa and other courageous journalists like him against a political system that had sought to silence them. Now, this was an interesting comment coming from Jacob Zuma, given the often quite contentious relationship he's had with the South African press. And he isn't the only ANC figure or public figure who sort of conjured up Nat and conjured up this great tradition of black anti-apartheid, anti-establishment writing in South Africa as a way of making a point about the contemporary media landscape. Your Minister of Justice, Jeff Hadebe, also did it. In 2010, he was speaking about the Protection of State Information Bill, which was then in one of its earlier iterations, the Secrecy Bill. And he said that this regulation was going to be a very important one to protect all of South Africa's citizens, including its journalists, from the dangers of misinformation, he said. And he said that this law was going to be a fitting tribute to our departed gallant fighters, such as Nat Nakasa. So, of course, this vision of Nat Nakasa as kind of proverbially tipping his hat to modern ANC policy on the media has also had to contend with another kind of popular imagining of Nat Nakasa on the other side by opponents of the government's media laws. So around the same time, Peter MacDonald, who's a scholar at Oxford who studies South African censorship, said that Nat Nakasa actually would be horrified by the Secrecy Bill and that his ghost would haunt the halls of Parliament as it was debated because he had so strongly believed that freedom of speech was a human right and the cornerstone of democracy. So I actually find sort of both of these conjuring up of Nat's legacy troubling. And the reason is, I think both of them speak to this tendency in South Africa as elsewhere, but in South Africa particularly, to take these historical figures who were in their lives complex, contradictory, sometimes perplexing, just people with lives that were sprawling, that did not easily fit into categories, and kind of strip them of all the particulars of the lives they lived, and leave only this kind of vapid, almost contentless symbolism. You know, people like Nat become a symbol of the destruction that apartheid wrought on this community of writers and journalists and artists in South Africa, rather than in any way being figures in their own right. And I mean, in a sense, you could say, is it really so bad that everyone loves Nat Nakasa, that people from all different, ends of the political spectrum remember him well? But I think that the problem here, not just with Nat Nakasa, but with lots of historical figures, we all saw it when Mandela died, is that when you strip people's lives of their particulars, you get this history that appears as a kind of just grand moral fable. And I think it's really easy, especially from the outside, especially where I come from, to see South African history in these kind of very dichotomous terms, as a place where good fought against evil, where oppressors fought against oppressed, where black fought against white, and where the participants were just these kind of caricatured, one-dimensional, heroic figures. And so I think to turn Nat Nakasa or anyone else into that robs them of the particulars of their life story, and also robs South Africa of the true content of its history in a lot of ways. So just a few remarks about Nat himself to sort of fill in both MacDonald's comments, Kadebe's, and Zuma's. is that I wouldn't say this was a man who was in any way a crusader for media freedom. I think what he was a very ambitious, very talented black journalist who had the great misfortune of growing up in South Africa in the mid-20th century. And that was a life that meant that whatever he had done with his life, if he had been a gardener, if he had been a dock worker in Durban where he grew up, or if he had been a journalist as he was going to run smack into state-sponsored segregation, and he was going to have to deal with that however he could. And so the way that he dealt with it was he wrote about black life, which seems a quite ordinary thing to do, but he and his colleagues left this incredibly rich record of a black South Africa that was, even at that time, in the process of being snuffed out and transformed by apartheid policies. He also started what was probably the first black-run literary magazine in South Africa. He wrote the first black-run or black-written column for one of Johannesburg's leading white papers, the Rand Daily Mail. And he wrote for foreign publications. He wrote for the New York Times. He carried the experience of being black in South Africa in the 1950s and 60s all the way across continents and oceans. And then, of course, we know he left South Africa. But he didn't leave as a kind of foot soldier of the freedom movement. He didn't leave on the perch of some great moral principle. He left because Harvard University called, and they wanted him to do a journalism fellowship, a very prestigious one called the Nieman. And so he left in large part to pursue his own ambitions and his own career. And of course, it was only 10 months after he left South Africa that he died in July of 1965. And when he died, this group of South African exiles, then living in New York and in the US, gathered together to mourn him, including Miriam Makeba and her then husband, Huma Sakela. And at this funeral, Miriam sung a song that in Zulu, that when the press asked what the song was called, she said, it is called The Faults of These Noble Men. But of course, what was so interesting about that group of exiles who had gathered that day is they hadn't really gathered to mourn a noble man. They had gathered to mourn a man who was, I think in many ways, quite ordinary. A man who had the courage to take what he could from a state that gave very little, and to seize freedom in the small places where he could find it, by having a white girlfriend, by drinking in shebeens in town after curfew, So for him, it was a life, and for all of these exiles, it was a life where freedom was never necessarily the sort of long struggle arching towards justice at the end. It was something you sort of seized day in and day out, one day at a time. And so I think that when people like Jacob Zuma call Nat a courageous patriot and kind of laud his heroism, I think that I'm just very skeptical of the way they've understood his life, and I'm also very skeptical of the way that I think they perceive he would see contemporary South Africa. Because, after all, this is a man who once wrote, "The writer can take his choice. He can bow to social convention, or he can refuse to let officialdom regulate his personal life, face the consequences, and be damned." Thank you.
Thank you, Rad. I think that's very, very interesting, and I have a few questions to you as well about the book and what you've learned out of it. But I'd like, before we go there to question time, I'd like to pass on the mic to actually Nat's friends and contemporaries to give us a little bit of an insight into Nat, the person, and not only maybe the work, but Nat, as you know him. And I know you can do that very well. And I think that Mr. McMullen will give you the chance first, and then we'll pass on the baton. Just try to give a little bit of sorry, the mic is off. Just a little bit of an insight into who Nat was as a person.
What name did you give them? Who did you say my name was?
I introduced you as Mr. Manavani. Did I do that wrongly?
No, you didn't.
No. Sorry.
Doesn't matter.
No. You have a mic. Yes, you have the mic.
No.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm not well. Ned Nakasa was like a brother to me. At some point, we stayed together at my place in Deep Creek. We worked for the Red Daily Mail and Drum Magazine. When we worked for the Red Daily Mail, there was a challenge between some whites who were right-wing, who did not like the way we operated, who did not like the way the editor treated us. Ned and I did not take nonsense from anybody. From anybody. We did not take nonsense. If we wanted a story, we wanted a story. And if we want to go into a place, we go into that place. Nobody will stop us, nobody, policeman or what, can stop us. Because our editor told us that we should not allow anyone to dictate terms to us. Then it came a point where Ned had to leave because he couldn't get a passport to go to America. So Ned left the country. We met up again in America. We met up at Miriam Makiwa's place in New York. I was a worried man because Ned wanted to commit suicide. And I said to him, Nakasa, we come from Johannesburg, where we told people to leave us alone. Don't even think about taking your life. We will deal with it. I remember one day we were in a shopping complex. Instead of going up, we were taking an elevator that is going down. It's there that I realized that there was definitely something wrong with us, Nakasa and myself. When my mother was sick, dying, Nakasa was staying with me. He is the one that looked around for me, found me, and said, your mom is very sick, let's go home. We went home. And then Nakasa decided he's had enough of South Africa. He left the country. I later joined him. We met up at Miriam and Hugh's place in New York City. Now, next Nakasa, we're going to do a story on the Black Americans in the South. We had planned everything. We were supposed to leave the following day. I went to Miriam's place. Ned Nakasa went to his home, which was, the building was next to Central Park West. It was on the second floor where he was staying. I got a call from Ned Nakasa saying he was leaving. He spoke to each and everyone in Miriam Akiba's house. The next thing, we get a call from the owner of the flat that Nakasa has fallen through the balcony. He did not commit suicide. As people know, he did not commit. Nakasa was not that type to commit suicide. He was walking, and he walked through the window which was open. And it was fortunate that Miriam Akiba was around, Hugh Masekela's sister, myself, we were able to bury Ned Nakasa. He had a beautiful funeral, if I must say so. I miss that young man because we did not take nonsense from nobody. If we wanted a story, we wanted a story. And we will get it. Even if it meant hiding my cameras and a half a loaf of bread, opening the side of the bread, pretend as if I'm eating the bread. In the meantime, I'm taking pictures. Ned Nakasa is there writing. When I saw that was finished, everybody would now begin to recognize me. I bought a pint of milk. I emptied the milk and put my camera in the box of milk with a cable release in my pocket. We continued our work. Drum Magazine was the only magazine in the country that had pictures of that hero, the women appearing for burning their passes. We were the only magazine that had the story. I was never afraid whenever I would let Nakasa. I remember when they joined Drum, Ned Nakasa and Louis Kosi came from Durban. They answered an advert that said 2 young journalists wanted in Johannesburg by the Rand Daily Mail. They came to Johannesburg. The day they came, it was a treason trial. They were sent to the treason trial. They ran away because they were beaten up by the police. Now, can you imagine coming to get a new job, start a new job, and before you even start, you get beaten up? But they did not run. They stayed. And we carried on. If things were bad, I would put my camera underneath my dust coat. The Nakasa would keep you talking. I would just go like this. I've got my pictures. Our editor, Tom Hopkinson, knew very well that if we went out on a story, we'd never miss, we'd come back with the story. Those were the lovely days. My other colleague here, Julie Myatt, where are you? Grandma, Julie Myatt, where are you? Just stand, let them see you.
Would you like to come up and join us?
This lady has guts. This lady had guts. You know, you tell her you do not want to see her. She tells you, you don't own me. I'm a person of my own. I adore her very much. We never allowed anyone to dictate terms to us. Well, times have gone, times have changed. You don't need to hide your camera today. But do you know how to use your camera properly? Do you know how to use your pen properly? That is the thing. Thank you.
I think those are, I hope that our journalism students in the crowd have comments to that. I'm going to pass on the baton, as I say, in a few words from the two of you. And if there's anyone else from the floor afterwards who wants to say a few words, who knew that wants to have some words to say, then we're going to definitely make time for that.
Thanks. Harry Mashavela is my name. I did not know Ned Macalsa as much as Peter did. I think they worked together for a much longer time, and I worked with him briefly. I came into Johannesburg at the end of 1959 and joined Ned, who was working for Drum, and I joined a sister paper, Golden City Post, in 1960. That was, for me, somebody who came from the countryside, someone very different from a lot of the other journalists who came from places like Soweto, Pretoria, and so on. I found him very amazing. The others drank very heavily. He drank, but not as much. And despite apartheid, Ned didn't live in Soweto. He lived somewhere in Johannesburg. I can't tell you to this day where Ned lived, but I knew he lived in Johannesburg. Sometimes a man is popularized by being given an assignment, a particular assignment. I think what made Ned very famous was the column that he did for the Randburg Mail. Before then, he was Ned, this amazing young man who, unlike other journalists, drank, but drank with some modesty. Now, the column that he wrote, very perceptive stuff, very thought-provoking stuff, very analytical, looking at the problems that we all suffered from. And I began to wake up to say, but who is this fellow? And I began to take greater notice of him. But as I say, I worked with him very briefly. There was a magazine, Classic, if I'm not wrong. I think he started that magazine, or he was one of the people who started that magazine, Classic. Again, a very special kind of journal. Then, of course, he had this fellowship to go to Newman. He got a Newman fellowship, which he had to do at Harvard University in the United States. And he had to go out there, as everybody knows. He was not issued with a passport. He was given an exit permit, which I think appropriately is depicted in the book that we are supposed to launch today, A Native for Nowhere. About the same time, I also got a fellowship to go to Princeton University. I was at Princeton while Ned was at Harvard. But Ned was very outspoken, even at Harvard, very outspoken, continuous along the same line when he was writing his column. And I think a lot of Americans took notice of him, particularly Black Americans. And he started associating with the civil rights people, the Malcolm X. I was very subdued. I would talk to people at a very personal level about conditions in South Africa. I never made public statements, as Ned did. So the university where I was, Princeton, eventually invited Ned to come and address them there. And when he came up, I was asked to be in the front as I am today with Ned. And I was with him there. Ned stood up to address the students. He was totally different from the Ned that I know from South Africa. He sounded extremely bitter. And I kept on asking myself, what would have happened to this man? That pleasant young man, very perceptive, very analytical, sounding so bitter. And I tell you what I mean by saying he sounds so bitter. He was, in delivering his message there, he was talking about white people and saying, when we black people do certain things, they say we are barbarous. And he was saying, right in the heart of New York, I go to a restaurant and they feed me with meat still bleeding, a steak that's still bleeding. So when we do this back home, they tell us this is barbarous. And at the end of it, I said to Nat, what's happening? I mean, why do you feel this way? No, but this is true. Harry, this is true. White people are very funny people. And I asked him, who are your friends here and where do you live? And they ended up that at weekends, when he's off university, he spends most of his time in Harlem with the Malcolm X's and the other people. And I started getting 1 plus 2, saying this is probably where this whole thing has arisen, making this change in the attitude of this fellow. Now, what amazed me, at the time when they said that Ned Nakasa died, I was only back home. I actually worried because at the time, there was a story that he had been given a project by the New York Times to go to South America, which is a racist part of America, and write stories as he moves around that. I mean, any journalist would have loved that. Would have loved that because it would have given him an opportunity to really look at how other people live and write about that. But then he passes out at that moment, and with the story that the man has committed suicide. To this day, I still don't know what would have happened. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to pose two questions to both Ryan and our panelists, and then we'll pass the mic on to the floor. It's interesting to notice that we do with our journalism students every year, and I know that there are students here from WITS as well who do the same project, that we talk about drum contemporaries, and we talk about Nana Casa in class, and you do assignments, and I assess the WITS journalism students' assignments every year as well. One of the assignments that I enjoy the most is always the Nana Casa assignment, and I think that it's fascinating when you see young journalists today talking about a different generation of journalists and what they've learned and what they take forward. I think that's one thing that's really interesting. And before now, we haven't had a book to put in the hands of our students either, so I look forward to doing that very much. But what do you think, Ryan? What do you think? Who knew Nat so well? What can we take from Nat's journalism into contemporary journalism? What can we learn? What can we take forward, particularly for our journalism students here at the university?
Well, I think what drew me to the drum writers initially was that there is quite a lot of political writing in drum, very, very serious head-on takes of political issues, but there's also quite a lot of writing that just addresses the realities of Black life under apartheid in South Africa. And I think that is truly what's remarkable about that era of Black journalism, is that it left this really rich layer of historical memory for all of us, of just what life was like. And I think, there's a tendency to see certain kinds of journalism as more serious than others, that political journalism is maybe more hard-nosed than writing features, than doing these kind of profiles and things like this. And I think this era in South African journalism, one of many things it shows is that kind of writing has a serious place in history as well. So for me, that was a big thing.
I want to pass the same question on to our panelists, and I hope it's on. It's still there.
I would like to show photographically what old South Africa looked like, what people looked like, and how journalists work. If you permit me, to meet your students who are doing journalism, and show them what South Africa was. Yesterday's South Africa. Because whether it's pictures, it still comes the same, but pictures are more powerful than writing. They will never forget what they saw. As a photographer, I have 23 books. On apartheid and things, you just mentioned South Africa. There is absolutely nothing that I do not have photographically on the old South Africa. I would love to pass this on to my children. If you can put them together, not only children who are journalists, no. Anyone, any child that wants to know about the past, I will show it photographically. Then you will believe that we come from another planet. We had our parties. We used to go to the suburbs. Our friends used to invite us to the suburbs and have parties there. When the police come, one or two people go to the back and talk to the police, give them a bottle of brandy, then they would go, leave us alone, and we would enjoy it till the next morning. You know, things were tough, but we had a way of dealing with it. At the Rand Daily Mail, we had there was a shop, fish and chips shop outside there. It was called Mrs. Simich's Place. Every when you feel you're thirsty, you go down there, you buy a bottle of brandy beer, or you buy your nip of brandy, you drink, and you come back to the office. The one that I loved was the one when we have parties. Nadine Gordon's place was a place where we used to go to have parties and drinks. But when the police come, these were not black policemen, white policemen. We go to the back. Hey, Basi, hoe gaan dit man? Lekker man, lekker. You know, wat kan ek maak vir die basie? Then we know, we take a bottle of brandy, we wrap it up. We give the basie the bottle of brandy. The basie goes, says, elke ding is all right. This was the life that we led those days. If you have your bottle of brandy, you'd get away with murder. Journalism today is no longer as enterprising as it was in our days, you know. In our days, it was challenging, but we were able to do our best under circumstances. When they ask me, what is your name? Peter Breeders. Huh? Peter Breeders. They say, what is your farm? I was Peter Breeders. Huh? Yeah, that is me now. And they would leave me as black as I am. No, life those days was wonderful, challenging. All you needed was open up your head. You know that when you're talking to a white policeman, you don't leave out Basi. Hi Basi, hoe gaan het met Bas? Nee, het is maar goed man. Ek is net 'n bietjie dors mee was. Dors vir wat? Brandewyn, ja. I went to my auntie in Natal in Newcastle. Now, Indians and colors were allowed to drink in pubs, but black people were not allowed. I went in there, I ordered. They said, no, we don't serve black people. I said, I'm not black, I'm colored. Like I said, clear on you. Now, one thing, the Indians in Durban don't understand Afrikaans. Don't understand, don't speak Afrikaans. And I spoke to them in Afrikaans. Then they said, why don't you speak in English? I said, Afrikaans is my taal. I had what I wanted to have, my beer, and I left. Just said, thank you. You had to be smart up here. Thank you.
I don't think I understood your question very well. But if the little that I picked up, you want us to look at journalists of today in comparison with the journalists
Yes.
of Nagasa's period. Let me say that journalists are supposed to be very truthful in what they do, and they need to be aware of the fact that their responsibility is to inform the public. There is also the element of giving guidance, particularly when you think in terms of articles rather than news stories. So there's a difference between the news stories which just depict what is going on, and also looking at the situation as Ned was doing in the column that he was writing for the Monday Mail. What makes us, I think, different from the lot that is operating today, I think when one considers that, one needs to look also at the fact that the situation is different. At that time, as black journalists, we faced one big problem, apartheid, which was oppressing our people, oppressing us. Today, the situation is different. It is our people who are doing the oppressing, and a number of people think, no, this cannot be wrong. Even when they look at the injustices that are prevalent, say this can't be wrong. It's our people. We don't want to be seen writing ill of our own people. We didn't have that problem then. We didn't have that problem. I listen to the radio, you've got talk radios, and I read a lot of articles in the newspaper. People are analyzing the situation. And sometimes I wonder, where do these people come from? Today, are they really looking at this situation as I see it? Because some of them seem so happy. And I'm saying maybe because there's been so much in the media unbundling of newspapers. We have black people who are now in charge in terms of holding senior positions in newspapers. And sometimes when you are very comfortable, you tend to forget the misery that the bulk of the people are subjected to. And again, I must say, we didn't have that problem. That is the journalists of Nakasa, the Ken Tempers, the Hendrik Malos, the Skiom Pacheles. They didn't have this kind of problem, where some of them are so secured. Everything is beautiful in the midst of ugliness. I don't know whether I've answered your question.